The lights of the Ed Sullivan Theater blazed as the cameras rolled live on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. But in an instant, the atmosphere shifted. Stephen Colbert, the master of quick-witted banter, froze mid-sentence, his eyes wide with disbelief as he stared at Jonathan Roumie, the actor renowned for portraying Jesus in The Chosen. What Jonathan had just revealed about his faith, his struggles, and his journey was so raw, so unexpectedly profound, that it silenced the seasoned host, transforming a routine late-night interview into a moment that would soon have millions of viewers across America clutching their phones, eager to share with loved ones the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. The studio audience, initially buzzing with anticipation for Stephen's trademark humor, fell into a hushed reverence, sensing they were witnessing something far beyond entertainment. "Stephen, we're live," the producer's urgent whisper crackled through his earpiece. But Stephen remained still, his gaze locked on Jonathan, a mix of awe and vulnerability flickering across his face. Jonathan stood calmly, his gentle smile radiating a quiet strength, seemingly unaware of the seismic impact his words had ignited, a spark that would soon set hearts ablaze across the nation. The moment had its roots earlier that evening, when Jonathan Roumie arrived at the iconic theater in New York City, his presence drawing whispers from the crew as he moved through the bustling backstage area. The Chosen had become a cultural phenomenon, and Jonathan, its humble star, was no stranger to the attention his role attracted. Stagehands and makeup artists exchanged excited glances, some bold enough to ask for selfies with the man who brought Jesus to life on screen. In his dressing room, Stephen Colbert, known for his sharp intellect and Catholic faith, flipped through his notes, preparing for what he expected to be a standard celebrity interview, some light-hearted questions about The Chosen, a clip from the latest season, and a few laughs to keep the audience engaged. His assistant knocked softly. "Stephen, Jonathan's ready for the pre-show meet and greet." Adjusting his glasses and smoothing his suit, Stephen headed to the green room, mentally rehearsing his opening quips. When he met Jonathan, the handshake was warm, Stephen's charisma instantly filling the space. "Jonathan, The Chosen is touching hearts everywhere," Stephen said sincerely, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. Jonathan's response was soft but striking. "I'm just grateful to be a small part of something so much bigger than me, Stephen." It's all about pointing people to him. The humility in his voice caught Stephen off guard, a flicker of recognition passing through the host, who, as a man of faith, sensed an authenticity that went beyond typical celebrity charm. "Playing Jesus must feel like carrying a mountain," Stephen observed, his tone half joking but genuinely curious. Jonathan nodded thoughtfully, his eyes steady. "It's a weight I don't carry alone. That role, it's changed everything about how I see my life, my purpose, even my struggles." The conversation was cut short by the stage manager's call, but Stephen felt an unexpected pull to keep talking, sensing there was a depth to Jonathan that deserved more than a soundbite. As the show went live, Stephen strode onto the stage with his signature energy, the audience roaring as he launched into his monologue, weaving pop culture jabs with political satire. When he introduced Jonathan, the applause was thunderous, the crowd eager to see the man behind the iconic role. Jonathan walked out, waving modestly, his presence somehow calming the frenetic energy of the late-night set. The interview began predictably, with Stephen tossing out playful questions about the challenges of filming in the desert and how Jonathan prepared to embody such a revered figure. Jonathan answered with warmth and humor, matching Stephen's wit while subtly steering the conversation toward the heart of The Chosen, its mission to show Jesus as both divine and deeply human. The audience laughed at Stephen's quips, but those paying close attention noticed a shift in the host's demeanor. His usual rapid-fire segues slowed, his questions lingering longer on Jonathan's responses, as if he were searching for something deeper. During the first commercial break, Stephen leaned in, his voice quieter. "Jonathan, I've got to ask, how do you handle the pressure of playing Jesus? I mean, that's not just a role, it's a legacy. Jonathan's eyes lit up with sincerity. "Stephen, it's not about handling it alone. When I step into those robes, I feel a presence guiding me, like I'm being held up by something greater." The crew bustled around them, adjusting lights and microphones, but Stephen was fully focused on Jonathan's words. "You know, before The Chosen, I was at my breaking point," Jonathan continued, his voice soft but steady. "I was a struggling actor in LA, barely making rent, questioning if I was even on the right path. I'd take any job, commercials, voiceovers, anything to keep going." Stephen nodded, relating to the grind of the entertainment industry. "What changed?" he asked, genuinely invested. Jonathan's face softened. "I hit rock bottom, Stephen. I was praying one night, asking God if I was wasting my life. A week later, I got the call to audition for The Chosen. It wasn't just a role, it was an answer, a purpose." The stage manager signaled the end of the break, but Stephen hesitated, reluctant to let the moments slip away. Back on air, the interview resumed, but the tone had shifted. Stephen's questions grew more introspective, his usual comedic rhythm giving way to a quieter curiosity. The audience, sensing the change, leaned in, their laughter softer, their attention sharper. Stephen abandoned his cue cards, deciding to follow the thread Jonathan had started. "Jonathan, I want to go deeper here," he said, his voice carrying a rare vulnerability. "What's the hardest part about playing Jesus? Not the acting, but the personal weight of it, the spiritual side." The question hung in the air, the studio falling silent as Jonathan paused, his hand brushing the small cross necklace he always wore, a subtle gesture that grounded him. "Stephen, the hardest part isn't memorizing lines or meeting expectations," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "It's trying to live up to his example when the cameras stop rolling. It's asking myself every day if I'm reflecting even a fraction of his love, his compassion, his humility in my own life." The audience was riveted, their usual cheers replaced by a hushed focus, some shifting in their seats as if confronting their own inner questions. Stephen leaned forward, his usual wit absent, his eyes locked on Jonathan. "That's profound," he said softly, almost to himself. Jonathan continued, his words carrying a quiet authority that seemed to fill the room. "When I'm on set, wearing those robes, I'm constantly reminded that Jesus wasn't just a character in a story. He was real, a man who walked this earth, who felt joy and pain, who loved so deeply he gave everything for us. How do you portray that kind of love? It's not just acting. It's a challenge to become a better version of myself every single day." The studio felt transformed, the bright lights and polished set fading into the background as Jonathan's words created a sacred space. Stephen, usually quick to pivot, let the moment breathe, his own faith stirring as he processed the weight of what Jonathan was sharing. The conversation deepened as Jonathan, unprompted, opened up further, his voice steady but filled with passion. "You know, Stephen, when I first auditioned for The Chosen, I was just an actor desperate for a break. I was broke, living in a cramped apartment, wondering if I'd ever make it. But studying Jesus' life, really diving into who he was, changed everything. I realized he wasn't some untouchable figure in a stained glass window. He was human, fully human, feeling the same struggles we do. Loneliness, doubt, temptation, but he chose love every single time." Stephen nodded, his eyes glistening as memories of his own faith journey surfaced. Moments in church, quiet prayers at home, times when he'd felt God's presence, but hadn't articulated it so publicly. "That's incredible, Jonathan," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "You're not just playing a role, you're living a calling." Jonathan smiled gently, his humility disarming. "I try, but it's not about being perfect. Jesus doesn't ask for perfection, he asks for willingness. Every morning, I pray the same prayer. Lord, make me a vessel for your love today. That's what keeps me grounded." The audience was silent now, some wiping tears, others clutching hands with those beside them, all caught up in the authenticity of the moment. The crew, accustomed to the fast-paced chaos of live television, stood still, their usual cynicism softened by Jonathan's words. In the control room, the director hesitated to cut to commercial, his instincts telling him to let this moment unfold. This wasn't the usual late-night fluff. It was raw, real, and resonating with everyone in the room. Stephen, visibly moved, leaned closer, his voice carrying a vulnerability rarely seen on his show. "Jonathan, I've got to be honest. I've interviewed countless people, actors, authors, even presidents, but I've never heard anyone talk about their work with such faith, such heart. You're making me think about my own life, my own prayers." The admission was unguarded, a window into the man behind the host, and the audience felt the weight of it, their silence deepening. Jonathan's face lit up with warmth. "Stephen, that's the beauty of Jesus' message. It's not just for me or for the set of The Chosen. It's for everyone, here in this studio, at home watching, in their cars, their offices. He invites us all into a relationship with him, not because we're perfect, but because we're willing to show up." The studio felt like a sanctuary now, the usual late-night buzz replaced by a reverence that touched every heart. Stephen's voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "You know, I pray before every show, asking God to help me bring a little joy, a little light to people's nights. But this feels different. This feels like God's doing something bigger." Jonathan nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. "He is, Stephen. God loves to use ordinary moments like this, a conversation, a question, a stage, to remind people He's real, He's here, and He loves them more than they can imagine." The audience began to applaud, not in the typical raucous way, but with a depth that acknowledged the spiritual weight of what they were witnessing. Some were crying openly, others smiling through tears, all feeling the undeniable presence of something greater moving through the room. The Ed Sullivan Theater, usually a whirlwind of laughter and applause, had fallen into a reverent hush as Stephen Colbert, still reeling from Jonathan Roumie's profound words, leaned forward at his desk, his usual comedic armor replaced by a raw, searching intensity. Jonathan, standing calmly on stage, had just shared a glimpse of his spiritual journey, how playing Jesus in The Chosen wasn't just a role, but a calling that had reshaped his life. The audience, sensing the weight of the moment, hung on every word, their earlier excitement for a light-hearted interview now transformed into a collective anticipation of something far deeper. Stephen's voice, softer than usual, broke the silence. "Jonathan, you're saying things that are hitting me in a place I didn't expect tonight," he admitted, his eyes glistening with a vulnerability rarely seen on live television. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every nuance, as the producer in the control room hesitated to interrupt, sensing that this unscripted exchange was becoming something extraordinary, something that could touch millions. Jonathan's gentle smile widened, his presence radiating a peace that seemed to envelop the studio, leaving everyone, from the crew adjusting lights to the audience members clutching their programs, wondering what revelation might come next. Stephen, still processing Jonathan's words about living up to Jesus' example, shifted in his chair, his note cards forgotten on the desk. "I need to dig into this, Jonathan," he said, his tone a mix of curiosity and reverence. "You talk about praying to be a vessel, about feeling guided on set. But let's get real. How does that work in a world like Hollywood, where faith isn't always the loudest voice? I mean, you're surrounded by egos, pressure, the whole machine. How do you hold on to that kind of conviction?" The question was personal, almost confessional, reflecting Stephen's own experiences as a Catholic navigating the entertainment industry. Jonathan paused, his hand brushing the cross necklace at his throat, a gesture that seemed to anchor him. "Stephen, it's not easy," he began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "Hollywood can be a tough place to stay grounded. Before The Chosen, I was drowning in that world, audition after audition, rejection after rejection, wondering if I was enough. I'd look around and see people chasing fame, money, validation, and I was tempted to do the same. But when I got the call to play Jesus, it was like God was saying, "This isn't about you. It's about me." That shifted everything. The audience leaned forward, their silence profound, as if they were eavesdropping on a private conversation between two souls. Stephen nodded, his own memories of struggling to balance faith and ambition surfacing. "I get that," he said softly. "I've had my own moments of wondering if I'm doing this, hosting, performing, for the right reasons. But your story feels bigger." What was it like, that moment you realized this role was more than a job? Jonathan's eyes softened, and he took a deep breath, as if preparing to share something he rarely spoke about publicly. "Stephen, to answer that, I have to take you back to one of the darkest times in my life," he said, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that drew the audience in further. "A few years before The Chosen, I was at my lowest. I was living in a tiny, run-down apartment in Los Angeles, barely scraping by. I'd been acting for years, but the roles were small, commercials, bit parts, nothing that paid the bills. I was driving for ride shares at night, serving coffee during the day, and every rejection felt like a confirmation that I wasn't cut out for this. I remember sitting in my car one night, parked outside a convenience store, just broken. I prayed, really prayed, for the first time in a long time. I said, "God, if this isn't what you want for me, show me. Give me a sign, because I can't keep going like this." The studio was so quiet that the hum of the cameras seemed loud. Stephen, usually quick to interject with a quip, was completely still, his eyes locked on Jonathan, sensing the weight of what was coming. Jonathan continued, his voice growing softer but more resolute. "A week later, I got a call from my agent about an audition for a new project. It was The Chosen, and they were looking for someone to play Jesus. I didn't think I had a chance. I mean, me playing Jesus? But I went to the audition, and something felt different. It wasn't just nerves or the usual pressure. It was like I was being carried through it. When I got the call that I'd been cast, I fell to my knees in that same tiny apartment and wept. It wasn't just a role. It was God answering my prayer, telling me He saw me, He knew me, and He had a purpose for me." The audience, many wiping tears from their eyes, felt the raw authenticity of Jonathan's story, their own struggles resonating with his. Stephen, his own faith stirred, leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's incredible, Jonathan. I mean, that's the kind of story that makes you believe in divine timing. But how did you go from that moment, getting the role, to actually stepping into it? I can't imagine the pressure of portraying the Son of God." Jonathan smiled, a mix of humility and conviction in his expression. "Stephen, the pressure was overwhelming at first. I'd wake up every day thinking, who am I to do this? I'm just a guy from Brooklyn with my own flaws, my own doubts. But the more I studied Jesus' life, not just as an actor preparing for a role, but as a person seeking to understand Him, the more I realized He didn't choose perfect people. He chose fishermen, tax collectors, people with messy lives, and He used them to change the world. That gave me courage. I started praying differently, not just for the role, but for my life. I asked God to help me reflect even a fraction of Jesus' love, His compassion, His strength. And something amazing happened on set. In those moments when I was speaking His words or touching someone in a scene, I felt not alone. Like He was there guiding me. The studio felt like a church now, the usual late-night energy replaced by a sacred stillness. The crew, hardened by years in the industry, stood frozen, some wiping their eyes, others nodding as if Jonathan's words were speaking directly to their own hidden struggles. Stephen, his composure slipping, ran a hand through his hair, his usual polished demeanor giving way to something raw. "Jonathan, I've got to be honest with you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm a Catholic, I go to church, I pray, but hearing you talk like this, it's hitting me in a way I didn't expect. You're making me think about my own faith, my own life, in a way I haven't in a long time." The admission was unguarded, a rare glimpse of the man behind the host. And the audience felt it, their silence deepening as they sensed they were witnessing something historic. Jonathan's face lit up with warmth, his eyes reflecting a genuine compassion. "Stephen, that's the beauty of Jesus' message. It's not just for actors playing him or for people in a church pew. It's for everyone, here in this studio, watching at home, wherever they are. He meets us where we are, in our doubts, our questions, our messiances, and he says, 'I love you. You're enough.' That's what I've learned through this role, not to be perfect, but to be willing." The audience began to murmur softly, some nodding, others clutching hands with those beside them, all feeling the weight of Jonathan's words. The director in the control room, watching the monitors, whispered to his assistant, "Don't cut to commercial. Let this run." He sensed that what was unfolding was bigger than television, bigger than entertainment, a moment of genuine spiritual connection that could change lives. Stephen, his eyes glistening, leaned back in his chair, trying to regain his bearings. "You know, Jonathan, I pray before every show," he said, his voice steadying but still raw. "I ask God to help me bring a little joy, a little light to people's nights. But this feels like something else. It feels like God's doing something through you, right here, right now." Jonathan nodded, his smile warm and encouraging. "He is, Stephen. God loves to use ordinary moments like this, a conversation on a talk show, a question from the heart, to remind people he's real, he's present, and he loves them more than they can imagine. When I'm on set, filming scenes of Jesus teaching or healing, I feel that presence so strongly. It's not just acting, it's like I'm stepping into a relationship with him, and it's changing me from the inside out." The audience was fully captivated now, their earlier excitement replaced by a profound sense of awe. Some were openly weeping, others whispering prayers under their breath, all feeling the undeniable presence of something greater moving through the room. The crew, too, was affected. One lighting technician, who'd always dismissed faith as irrelevant, found himself wiping away a tear, unable to explain the stirring in his chest. The makeup artist, who hadn't been to church in years, felt a sudden urge to call her mother and reconcile after a long estrangement. Stephen, sensing the moment's gravity, decided to push deeper, his curiosity and faith intertwining. "Jonathan, I've got to ask you something personal," he said, his voice carrying a weight that matched the audience's anticipation. "When you're on set, playing Jesus, delivering those teachings, or showing that compassion, do you ever feel, I don't know how to say this, do you ever feel like he's actually there with you?" The question was raw, almost vulnerable, reflecting Stephen's own longing for a deeper connection with his faith. Jonathan paused, his eyes filling with tears as he considered his response. "Stephen, I don't want to sound out there, but yes," he said softly, his voice trembling with sincerity. "There are moments on set, when I'm speaking his words or reaching out to someone in a scene, where I feel this overwhelming sense of presence. It's like Jesus is right there, guiding my words, my actions, my heart. It's the most humbling, beautiful thing I've ever experienced." The studio was utterly silent now, the weight of Jonathan's words settling over everyone like a gentle wave. Stephen, usually so quick to fill the air with humor, was speechless, his hands resting on his desk as he processed the depth of what Jonathan had shared. The audience, too, was transformed. Some were crying, others holding hands, all feeling as if they'd been invited into a sacred moment. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second, as the producer in the control room made a split-second decision to let the moment continue, knowing they were documenting something unprecedented in television history. Jonathan, sensing the moment's intensity, stepped closer to Stephen, his voice carrying a gentle authority. "Stephen, what's amazing is that this isn't just about me or the chosen. It's about all of us. Jesus promised he'd be with us always, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in his name. And right now, in this studio, With all these people, with everyone watching at home, he's here. He's speaking to every heart that's open. Stephen nodded, his eyes wet, his usual showmanship replaced by a quiet reverence. "Jonathan, I've been doing this show for years, and I've never felt anything like this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I mean, we're supposed to be talking about your show, cracking jokes, but you've turned this into, I don't know, a church service." The audience laughed softly, not out of humor, but out of shared recognition. Their applause starting to build, not the usual raucous cheers, but a deep, heartfelt acknowledgement of the moment's power. Jonathan smiled humbly, shaking his head. "Stephen, it's not me. It's God working through this moment, through our conversation. When we make ourselves available, He uses even a talk show to touch hearts, to remind people they're loved, they're seen, they're never alone." The words landed with a weight that seemed to shift the very air in the room, crew members exchanging glances, some visibly moved, others whispering to each other about the electricity they felt. Stephen, his composure fraying, wiped his eyes and took a deep breath. "You know, Jonathan, I've always believed in God, but I've had my struggles, my doubts," he confessed, his voice raw and unguarded. "There are days when I wonder if I'm doing enough, if I'm living up to what I believe. Hearing you talk about being a vessel, it's making me question how I'm using this platform, this show." The admission was stunning, a rare moment of vulnerability from a host known for his polished exterior. Jonathan's face softened, his eyes filled with compassion. "Stephen, that's exactly where God meets us, in our questions, our doubts, our fears. He doesn't ask us to have it all figured out. He just asks us to show up, to be open. You're doing that right now, by being real, by letting this conversation go where it's going. That's faith in action." The audience was now fully immersed, some standing, others bowing their heads, all feeling as if they were part of something bigger than themselves. The director, watching from the control room, felt a lump in his throat, realizing that this moment was no longer about ratings or schedules. It was about something eternal, something that could ripple far beyond the studio walls. As the segment neared its end, Stephen made a bold, instinctive choice, his voice trembling but resolute. "Jonathan, I feel like we need to do something right now," he said, looking out at the audience, then back at Jonathan. "I feel like God's in this room, and we need to acknowledge that. Would you lead us in a prayer?" The audience gasped, then murmured in agreement, many already bowing their heads in anticipation. Jonathan's face lit up with joy, his eyes shining with tears. "Stephen, I'd be honored," he said softly, extending his hands toward the host. Without hesitation, Stephen took Jonathan's hands, and the two men stood together, the audience and crew joining in spirit. The stage manager, usually rigid about timing, signaled to keep the cameras rolling, sensing that what was about to happen would redefine this moment in television history. Jonathan closed his eyes, his voice calm but powerful. "Heavenly Father, thank you for this moment, for using a simple conversation to reveal your love. Thank you for Stephen's heart, for his courage to seek you on this stage. Touch every person here, every person watching at home, and remind them they are loved, valued, and never alone." The prayer was simple but electric, the studio alive with a tangible sense of God's presence, setting the stage for a climax that would leave no one untouched. The Ed Sullivan Theater, now a sanctuary of reverent silence, pulsed with an electric anticipation as Jonathan Roumie's prayer began, his voice steady and resonant, carrying a gentle authority that seemed to transcend the stage. Stephen Colbert, holding Jonathan's hands, stood with eyes closed, his usual polished demeanor replaced by a raw, open-hearted surrender that captivated the audience and crew alike. The prayer, simple yet profound, flowed like a river of grace, touching every heart in the room and beyond. "Heavenly Father, thank you for weaving your love through this unexpected moment, for using our words to reveal your presence. Bless Stephen for his courage, for opening this space for you. Touch every soul here, every heart watching at home, and let them know they are seen, loved, and never alone. Jonathan prayed, his voice trembling with conviction. Stephen, his voice thick with emotion, added softly, "Lord, thank you for Jonathan's faithfulness, for reminding us you're here, working through us, even on a talk show stage. Help us carry this love into our lives." The studio was transformed, the bright lights and polished set fading into the background as a tangible sense of God's presence settled over everyone. Audience members, some weeping openly, others clutching hands with strangers, felt as if heaven had touched earth. Crew members, hardened by years of late-night television's grind, stood frozen, some wiping tears, others whispering prayers they hadn't uttered in years. The director in the control room, tears streaming down his face, signaled to keep the cameras rolling, knowing this moment was not just television. It was a divine encounter that would echo far beyond the night's broadcast. As Jonathan concluded the prayer, "Father, let this moment be a seed of hope, planted in every heart, growing into a deeper relationship with you." A profound silence enveloped the studio, broken only by soft sobs and murmurs of awe. Stephen opened his eyes, his face wet with tears, and looked at Jonathan with a mix of gratitude and wonder. "Jonathan, I don't even know what to say," he whispered, his voice barely audible but picked up by the microphones, broadcasting his vulnerability to millions. "We were supposed to do a fun interview, crack some jokes, show a clip. But this is something holy. You've turned this stage into a church." The audience erupted in applause, not the usual raucous cheers, but a deep, heartfelt acknowledgement, many standing, some raising their hands in worship, others embracing those beside them. Jonathan smiled humbly, shaking his head. "Stephen, it's not me. It's God working through our willingness to be real. You opened your heart tonight, and that's what let him move." The crew, usually focused on cues and schedules, stood in awe, some joining the applause, others visibly moved by an experience they couldn't fully explain. The lighting technician, who'd long dismissed faith, felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't known since childhood. The makeup artist, estranged from her faith for decades, whispered a prayer of gratitude, resolving to call her family after the show. The phones in the control room lit up with calls from viewers across the country, some reporting they'd felt God's presence through their screens, others saying they'd recommitted to faith or prayed for the first time in years. Stephen, still holding Jonathan's hands, turned to the audience, his voice steadying but filled with passion. "Folks, I've been doing this show for years, and I've never experienced anything like this," he said, addressing both the studio and the millions watching at home. "Jonathan, you didn't just come here to talk about The Chosen. You brought Jesus into this room, into our hearts, and I know I'm not the same." The audience cheered again, their applause a mix of joy and reverence, many wiping tears as they nodded in agreement. Jonathan's eyes glistened, his humility unwavering. "Stephen, thank you for creating space for this. You could have kept it light, stayed on script, but you chose to go deeper. That's what God honors, our willingness to be vulnerable, to let Him work." The mutual respect between the two men was palpable, a bond forged in this unexpected spiritual encounter. The director, watching from the control room, made a historic call to extend the segment, letting the cameras capture every second of this unscripted moment. The network later reported that the episode's live stream crashed from the volume of viewers, as social media platforms exploded with clips of the prayer, shared by people across the globe, from small-town churches to urban apartments, all touched by the authenticity of what they'd witnessed. As the show ended, Stephen addressed the cameras directly, his usual showmanship replaced by a pastoral sincerity. "If you're watching tonight and you're struggling, feeling lost, alone, or unworthy, I want you to know what happened here is for you too. God's love isn't just for TV studios or actors playing Jesus. It's for you, right where you are," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. Jonathan nodded, his face glowing with joy. "That's right, Stephen. Jesus came for the broken, the searching, the ones who feel they've wandered too far. He's waiting with open arms, saying, "Come home. All it takes is a yes." The audience was now openly worshiping, some singing softly, others praying together. The studio transformed into a sacred space where strangers became family in the presence of God's love. The clip of this moment went viral within hours, reaching hundreds of millions worldwide, sparking conversations in homes, workplaces, and churches. Pastors used it in sermons, calling it the Late Show revival, while viewers shared stories of renewed faith, reconciled relationships, and first-time commitments to Jesus. Stephen and Jonathan's friendship deepened, leading to collaborations on faith-based initiatives that inspired millions more. Stephen began opening his shows with a moment of reflection, inviting viewers to seek hope in their own lives, while Jonathan continued his work on The Chosen with a renewed sense of purpose. Knowing his vulnerability had touched hearts globally, the ripple effects were immeasurable, proving that when ordinary people say yes to God, extraordinary miracles unfold in the most unexpected places, like a late-night talk show stage.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.